Right, well, good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for DSTEM 2019. My name is Shanae Baxter and I'll be your MC for today. We were due to have Auntie Diane Kerr, Wurundjeri Elder, come to welcome us to country today, but unfortunately she was unable to make it. So instead, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community of the Melbourne area. I pay my respects to them, their culture, and to their elders past and present. DSTEM is an enhanced STEM event for 2019. Building on our previous annual student conference, which was open to students in our programs to present their work to their colleagues, DSTEM aims to build the STEM talent pipeline and showcase the range of opportunities available at DST, as well as provide conversation, collaboration and engagement with DST, university and academic professionals. I would like to thank and acknowledge our event partner, the University of Melbourne Defence Enterprise team, for partnering with us to allow DSTEM to be grown into a 3-day event with a range of great engaging activities and amazing venues, like the one we're in today. Over the next 3 days, you will hear presentations from students from DST divisions about their projects and experiences that they've had while they're on their placements, as well as a range of other activities, including panel discussions, innovation workshop activities, and hearing from people who are at the front line of DST's work for supporting defence capability and more. To formally begin, I'd like to invite Acting Chief Defence Scientist, Dr. Todd Mansell, to give the opening address. Thank you.
G'day everybody and welcome to DSTEM. I would also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and acknowledge them and to pay respects to their elders past and present. It was interesting actually to see the peer group pressure here that got our MC to stand up. It's quite amazing, isn't it, to watch the crowd essentially drop, the volume to drop and then the MC to stand up. Essentially, here we are at the DSTEM conference, and of course, this is our first of an annual series of conferences. We've run a similar conference for about 4 years now, so it's fantastic to see so many people here. I'm told there's about 130 of the students and about 20 of our supervisors and other members of DST. So a fantastic group and a fantastic audience. I'd also like to start off by thanking the University of Melbourne and Emily in particular. You've put a heck of a lot of work into this, as well as the DST team, and it is much appreciated. About 30 years ago, I was sitting on that side, actually, as a vacation student, came into DST at the completion of my second year and spent some wonderful time working with a group that was focused on physics, developing what turned out to be the OzCam, the camouflage uniform that was used by our Defence Force. Before that, they had just dressed up in greens. And in that experience, spent time hanging out of helicopters and taking photos of different camouflage patterns, and then developing image processing techniques to try to extract the object you're trying to hide from the background. So. My first taste of DST was something that was very interesting. We probably wouldn't get it past our work health and safety reviews right now. And in fact, my daughter, who does not work in DST at the moment, but she also did a summer vacation scholarship at DST a few years ago and in the laser physics area, and similarly had some fantastic experiences. So I hope that you've all had a wonderful experience in DST. That you've discovered some of the really interesting things that we do, and also going to go out and talk to your friends and colleagues around what are the opportunities in DST. You probably have realised from your time in DST that science, technology, engineering and maths really does underpin Defence's capability. When you look at our nation, we have a small defence force relative to our region. And we really do rely on a technology overmatch to make sure that our Defence Force can remain small but very effective, and in particular to act as a deterrent to protect the nation. your time in DST and hopefully your future engagements working within the broader defence STEM environment will also contribute to the defence of the nation. I did want to talk a little bit though about the career options that are open to you. So in DST, we've had just through this activity. We've had, 40 summer vacation students. We've had 30 industry experience students. We've had 3 graduate industry placement students. And we have a further 32 IEP students starting in the next few months. So just on our student intake, we've got quite a number of people that are getting a good taste of DST and a good taste of working within a defence S&T environment. We're also committed to bringing a large number of graduates and PhDs into our organisation. We've committed to 100 APRA interns within DST over the next 5 years. We're partway into that. We have the STEM cadet program. We've got 21 cadets in 2016-17, but we've grown that to 50 STEM cadets now. We also have a strong Indigenous program with now having 2 electronics apprentices, 3 cadets and 2 early career researchers joining DST, so trying to open up that Indigenous pipeline as well. Also over the last few years we've had a real focus on how do we create more pathways into DST and I guess earlier pathways into DST. So far we've had 48 researchers join us through through ongoing employment and recruitment activities, and in particular the research and innovation pipeline of the broader defence graduate program, as well as now a pathway into DST. If you think about then what are your options if you join either DST or work with defence, utilise your STEM skills to work with defence in other ways through working within university on defence-related activities, in industry working on defence-related activities. There are a lot of different career paths open to you. I myself have worked in maritime mine warfare and started off working with clearance divers, and then spent a lot of time working on the submarines and remediation of the Collins program with Janice, who will talk to you later. Also on frigate and destroyer programs, worked on in the air combat domain, looking at what is the capability that our air combat or air power system needs. Worked in strategic policy, have done time as a science diplomat overseas in 3 different countries. So even though you might join defence in the future, or you might join defence industry or academia, there are so many career paths open to you, and whether you want to stay deep in your science or whether you want to broaden yourself and engage in a range of different scientific activities, the paths are really interesting. Not only that, but the experiences you get working in that. I've had the pleasure of spending time flying in an F-18, and also spent time in a range of different submarines and on surface ships. And every time you go out and see how the armed forces actually utilise their equipment, really the hostile and adverse environment in which they operate, you get a new appreciation for the human factors. How do they engage with their technology? The technology itself, whether it actually provides the right information to the person at the right time. The sort of environment that it has to deal with. It's not something that is sitting in an office when you're outside. Soldiers are throwing it around, chucking it in the back of a truck, or it's getting wet and dirty, and yet it still has to perform 100% when it's required. Those sorts of experiences really help focus you in developing the science and technology and making sure that what you give to people that are going to use it is fit for purpose. So all of those things really mean that you get a real exciting taste of working with defence and also applying your science and technology. I think DST also is really good at developing our people. We provide a lot of different range of courses, and we really understand that your defence career would be a life of learning. So that you'll spend time within our organisation, you'll learn about the domain in which your science and technology is applied. You will also be given opportunities to develop new skills in new areas. So I hope that you do choose a STEM career path, and hopefully a defence STEM career path in the future. Besides that, I'd just like to again welcome you all to DSTEM. I encourage you to come and talk to any of the DST people that you see here, as well as your student colleagues. There are a lot of different opportunities engaging both in the technology talks and having a look at some of them. They are fantastic. So I wish I was able to sit here for see more of them. As well as engage with some of the defence industry participants that are going to be around, come to the tours and get to interact with some of the defence scientists at the Fisherman's Bend site. So on that, welcome.
Thank you, CDS. I now welcome Professor Jim McCluskey, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research from the University of Melbourne, our DSTEM event partner for the week.
Thank you, Sinead, and welcome everyone to the University of Melbourne. And I just begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to our own very significant Indigenous leadership at this university. I'm the Head of Research at the University of Melbourne. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this event, an event that celebrates the partnership between DST and the University of Melbourne and the higher education sector more generally. I just congratulate Emily and Len Shacker and Todd for pulling this together, and thank you all for coming. This building is the Woodward building. It's the law school, but this floor is set aside for this sort of event, and a coffee shop and some other meeting rooms and dining areas. Edward Woodward was the head of ASIO, and he was the Chancellor of the University of Melbourne. I've always liked meeting here because it kind of echoes something we've been trying to do over the last decade as we inch forwards in our strategy and our role in Victoria and in this country. And that is, it kind of reflects our attempts to work more closely with industry and with the community whilst preserving what it is to be a university. So you look that way and you see the dreaming spires and one or two 1960s monsters. And you look that way and you see the city and the community, and it's bringing them together that matters. So today's event couldn't do that any better. There's no other event that could do it better than today's event, because defence and the science and technology that goes into that and the spin-outs from defence are hugely important science and technology drivers of a better nation. We bring together, I hope, deep research, scholarship, evidence-based practice to apply problems, issues that need to be solved, technology that will make a difference, more broadly than just protecting our defence personnel, but primarily focused at protecting them and supporting them. And many of you are working on projects or engaged in activities that address exactly those issues. And I just want to congratulate you on being here. For some of you, I suspect this could be your first conference. Others will be old hands already at this. Don't get too nervous as you present. I understand you're going to be presenting in front of supervisors and seniors, and that can be sometimes a bit daunting. This looks like it ought to be a rather informal gathering, and I hope it turns out that way for you. What we expect you to get from today and from the whole 3 days is a kind of understanding of DST, a deeper understanding of DST, of applied problems and how scholarship and deep science can be brought to bear on them, career opportunities that poke their head up by looking at role models and individuals you meet over the course of the time here, and a sense of the skills that you're going to need, that you're all evolving and developing, communication skills, all important, being able to plan things, being able to manage projects, and not being sort of oppressed by all of these what we call transferable or technical skills, and to remain creative and thoughtful and let the ideas bubble. And that balancing act is what this partnership is really all about. So I do hope that those promises of the next day and or so are fulfilled. I want to wish you good luck in your engagement, and can I just invite you and exhort you to get engaged, talk to people, meet people you haven't met before, ask questions, make this, a really live and active conference. Listen, reflect, learn. Have a great day, and congratulations to all of you on getting here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. To launch DSTEM 2019, I now invite you to view our new STEM video, which will give an insight about STEM at DST. Our team here filmed with a number of DST staff over a couple of weeks and asked them about why they chose careers with DST. So you'll get a bit of an insight into what they love about working here.
I used to sit on the study floor in my parents' house with the encyclopedias sprawled across the floor, reading up about the planets. That's my first memory of being just completely fascinated by space. Now I come to work every day and operate a spacecraft.
We actually do analysis and research in understanding the effects of electromagnetics.
I get to blow things up for a living. Every boy's dream.
Living the dream really for me.
What I'm doing is helping soldiers in field. It makes a real difference.
I am contributing to not only improving capability and not only mitigating risk, but saving the lives of the Australian troops.
We can have a diverse team. We have a diverse set of people working for us to achieve the challenging problems.
DST have a huge workforce that actually is an exemplar of bringing technical experts as well as to people.
We value those people who have got creative and inquisitive minds, because they're the type of people who will help to innovate and help to develop new capabilities that could benefit the Australian Defence Force for many years to come.
I think most people would be surprised at the breadth of the work that goes on in the organisation. In terms of the people involved, so we have people working in organisational psychology, chemists, biologists, electrical engineers. There's a wide spectrum of roles and responsibilities within the organisation.
DST exists because we're here to provide science and technology to our Australian Defence Force.
I love the interesting work that DST does. We're on the cutting edge of so many different fields, and I think it gives you a really great sense of purpose to come to work and know that you're helping Australia's defence and national security needs.
The motivation to come to work is the fact that I know that every day I can come to work and make a difference.
I think young Australians should consider DST as a career choice. If you work in STEM, it's, I'd say, one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting place to work in the country. You're engaged at the cutting edge of research, both in Australia and internationally, and for most people that results in a very rewarding career in the organisation.
What gets me out of bed in the morning? is definitely the reward I get from doing something a little bit difficult, doing it well, and knowing that it's making that difference to the lives of people in field.
Okay. So our next speaker is a very special person to DST. She's the former Chief of Science Strategy and Program Division, a strong supporter of STEM, and a female scientist highly regarded in her field. It's with pleasure that I welcome Dr. Jenna Skocking.
Thanks, Sinead. And welcome to the STEM conference. And I would also like to pay my respects to the original custodians of the Wurundjeri people, the land on which we are gathering today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to their leaders current and emerging. I think it's a great honour for me and a privilege to be able to talk to you about my career in defence science and to reflect on some of the commentary that's been you've heard in that video. For me, one of the great privileges, and I've worked for over 40 years in defence science, so I'm a really old person, older than many of your parents, but it's been a really wonderful experience to be able to see that you can make a difference, that the work that you do actually has an impact, and not everyone has a career that enables them to do that. And the work that I've been involved with my teams, and it's not as an individual, it's really being part of a team that allows you to make a difference. And so we've covered all the roles that DSTO and DSTG has been involved with, and so we've saved lives. We've advised government based on really sound and unbiased advice, and we're shaping the future. So what I would like to do in the next 15 minutes or so is just step you through my career and some of the opportunities and what I learned along the way as my career developed over time. So I won't go on a year-by-year basis because 40 years is a very long time. But I graduated from Melbourne University and physical metallurgy was the key for me. Supported by pure mathematics and a bit of chemistry, not so much physics, didn't much enjoy physics. And so armed with my first job with DSTO as it was then in physical metallurgy, I was the junior member of a team that was developing what was to become the Type N thermocouple. So why is that important? That was important because it was helping industry. And these thermocouples were used everywhere in furnaces in those days, and they drift over time, so you had to calibrate them against platinum thermocouples. And this new thermocouple was proven to drift more slowly than the regular thermocouples. And one of my jobs was to understand how the thermocouples behaved over time through the physical metallurgy, so that analysis and characterisation. But one thing that was interesting about that project was that the person who led that project actually left DSTO, as it was then, and set up his own company. So it was a spin-out then, and that still happens today. Even in the last year or so, we've had people from the National Security and ISR Division in South Australia, after being involved in CSIRO's ON program, spin out a company with support from DSTG. So once that program was finished, then I got involved in a program looking at protective coatings for the hot ends of gas turbine engines. It's mostly the engines in the F-111 aircraft. And again, I didn't develop that program, but I was one of the principal investigators in that program. And this is something that can only happen in Australia. And this is true again for today. So we were able to have military aircraft fly a rainbow trial, so trials of different coatings side by side in an engine, extract them so they saw exactly the same conditions. So there's a variable gone. So you could work out, my role was to understand how did they degrade, why did they degrade, and determine which one was best for the conditions of the Australian environment. And the Australian environment was a little different from all the other environments around the world because it's very much flying over salt-laden seas, and so the blades for F111s at those times would only last 500 hours. Our job was to try and increase that time, so we succeeded with these coatings to go from 500 hours to 750 hours, and the desire was then to push it out to 1,000. So this trial used American coatings. The reason the Americans came to us is because we had access to military engines and they didn't. So this is common today too. Again, we have access and the ability to do field trials that other countries can't manage to do. So what did I learn from that? I learned that actually turned out to be a really big success. And based on that success, I had the opportunity to go and work in America and live in America for a while. And that's another advantage of having working for a large organisation like DST, is that you have these opportunities to work in countries all over the world, be supported while you do it, and then you can come back and work here and bring your knowledge back to the benefit of all the people around you as well. So I learned about different business model. The American, it was the Naval Research Lab in Washington DC where I was working. They had a different business model than DST does, and that was interesting to know and see how they operate. The people who have a generosity of spirit and sharing their knowledge, and then there's those people who don't, who hold their knowledge very closely to them because that's how they get their funding, by being the only ones who know something. But I was the expert in degradation of engines and engine coatings, and that's why they wanted me. I made some really good friends from that time, and that was another bonus, I think, of having these sorts of overseas exchanges, is that you can make friends and meet scientists from all around the world. So the good fortune I had when working in this program is that by working with industry, you really get to understand what it takes to move an idea from the lab into something that's a product that people can use. And that's really important to know as a scientist who wants to get involved in applied research. So, and for me personally, there were a whole lot of awards and prizes that came with that, and promotions, which isn't such a bad thing either. So I came back to Australia, and that program was coming to an end as far as my involvement. So I got involved in ceramics for a while. So I moved from physical metallurgy with the knowledge of nickel-based superalloys and cobalt-based superalloys. So high temperature, what's another material? Ceramic composites materials. So I worked in that field for a little while, but there was really no application at that time for defence. So that program got cut. So you get to understand that as well, about the relative priorities and the needs. So the research was good, but there wasn't going to be a payoff. So at this stage, I'd say I was a mid-career scientist. And so I'd built a reputation as a scientist of having credibility, being able to be a really good analyst, and to be able to really deliver results. Put my work out for peer review so that other people could assess it and comment on it. And that way I could build my own confidence as a scientist. And having that posting to America really helped that as well, because you're not only benchmarking yourself against local scientists, you're benchmarking yourself against international scientists. And that was, I think, a really important step for me, and something maybe to bear in mind if you ever get that opportunity to have those sorts of postings. So I came back, and we were in the twilight of this ceramics program, and that was around about the time when the Collins-class submarines were starting to, the contract had been signed, the design had been locked down, and the construction had started. one of the elements associated with the Collins-class submarine at the time, based on a Swedish design, is the Swedes had what was called a Stirling engine. It's an auxiliary propulsion system for submarines. And so the project manager, who was an admiral based in Canberra, thought that DSTO should perhaps have a look at Stirling engines to see if they would be fit for purpose to introduce in the Collins-class submarines. So they contacted the head of the laboratory here in Melbourne, who then called me into his office and said, "You're going to be in charge of the Stirling engine program, and you've got 2 weeks to put the program together, and in 6 months from now we're going to have a Stirling engine here and it's going to be opened by the minister." And I thought, okay, what's a Stirling engine? And what, why me? But I'd worked on aircraft engines. So there's a challenge. So sometimes you get these opportunities, and then you just got to run with it. And the reason that program and the minister was there on time 6 months later to open the lab is that I had a team, and it was the first team that I'd ever really led. And it was a team, and I think we succeeded because we had lots of different skills within that team, and we could all pull together for a common purpose and appreciate each other's skills and the talents that we brought to it. The other, as part of that, what happened? I established the Stirling Engine Users Group. So that was it was a group of people who were looking at Stirling engines. So there was Australia involved, the Swedes involved, and Japanese were involved because they were looking at Stirling engines also for Japanese submarines. And for a time we had the Norwegians involved. So I got to understand how submarines operated. I learned about submarine design. I knew about the roles. So it was all on-the-job learning. It was really a growth time for me. And I think the other thing that it introduced me to was broader aspects. So because Stirling engines are a new acoustic source, so how do you detect a submarine? One of the ways is acoustically. So I was invited to go to the Joint Acoustic Analysis Facility up in Nowra to talk to them about Stirling engines and Stirling engine noise signatures. And so I broadened my knowledge. And I also looked at alternatives to Stirling engines, so fuel cell technology, closed cycle diesel engine, and that was my starting to build a reputation of knowing about submarines. As part of that program, I got to go to sea on Swedish submarines. I got to visit over time not only the Swedish submarine bases, but Swedish design bases, and over time in France, their design and construction facilities and bases. In Germany, their design and construction facilities and bases. The US construction facilities as well. So, and in Japan, not only their design facility, but also their construction facility and bases. Now, I've got to say, when you go to Japan, they don't necessarily have very many and women involved in the industry. So when you walk around a Japanese building yard and people look at you, you feel like you're the queen and you have to wave. But it was a really, really interesting experience. The other thing that was interesting about the first time I went to Japan, and that was back in the early 1990s, was that they would not allow the Australian Defence Attaché to go. So, but I could go as a scientist. So you have this ability to reach into areas that other people can't access. But I thought it was really, really wonderful time. And again, I made some lifelong friends from that program. Also around about this time, Collins was first of class with some of the issues of teething problems of Collins first of class issues were starting to make headlines in the newspapers. And the headlines were things like noisy as a rock band, not the headline you want to see if you're a submarine. And so there was a big program put in place. We used to call it the Get Well program. It was the Propeller and Hull Improvement program for the submarine. And so I was asked to be the coordinator for DST for all of our science and technology that was involved in making those submarines the best in the world, which we did manage to do over time. As part of that, it was found that the original design for the combat system the technology was ahead of the ability to be able to field a system, and so the combat system needed replacing. That was a really contentious time and issue. There were lots of people lobbying on what should be the new combat system, and an example of where Defence's ability and the trust placed in Defence by the government for providing unbiased advice is the fact that Todd, who was very closely involved in combat system technology, was invited to go and brief the minister one-on-one with the minister to fill him in on what was happening without having other people there putting in their two penneth worth, and which I think for Todd probably made him loved and hated in equal measure by winners and losers. But I think it says something about the trust that's placed in the organisation and in scientists in the organisation to be able to be called to the government to be able to provide that advice based on really deep, sound scientific knowledge. And I think that's a prospect that hasn't gone away for anyone entering the field of DST these days. So for me, that stage was a bit of a fork in the road. So I could decide to remain to be a scientist doing science, or I could decide to take the pathway that would lead me down the pathway of shaping the science, and that's the pathway that I chose. It's very difficult to be able to do both. You can try and juggle it for as long as you can, but at some stage or another there becomes a choice. One of the reasons I made that choice is that at one stage I worked for someone who I didn't necessarily enjoy working for, and so I thought, I'm going to put myself in that position again. So I decided that creating a program was so much better than necessarily jumping to someone else's orders. Says something about me. As part of that program too, I needed to be able to understand then what is it that the military really wants and what is it that they need, and what's the difference, and how do you determine that? And my area was submarine technology. So one of the things that I created then, and you get these opportunities. This is another thing that's really good about DST. You get all these opportunities to be able to put your eyes, ears into action, and really, with rare exceptions, those ideas are embraced and you can run with them and test them. So I created the Submarine 2020 conferences. They run at secret level. They had 150 people involved. A third of them were scientists, a third of them were industry people, and a third of them were the submariners. And so we would get together in these conferences and talk about submarine roles, where technology was transitioning to the future, and then we created the Build a Submarine game, where we had a unit of measure called the NANDA, and you had a set amount of money to build a submarine, and you couldn't afford the top line of every subsystem in the submarine. So from that I could learn from the submariners what was it they wanted to pay top dollar for, and what were they prepared to trade off. As a result of that program, it's really clear from that and the Collins class program how important stealth is to submarines. So we established the hydrodynamics program and a hydrodynamics group that hadn't existed before, but also built links with universities to build up their expertise so that we would have a talent pool coming through and the ability for them to be involved in research as well. And that was, I think, paid off and pays off today. It also helped me understand politics. The Collins Class program was one of those occasions where at Senate estimates, one side of government or people in government would beat up the opposition, and then the opposite. So, and you were the ball that was being bounced backwards and forwards in this tennis game between the government and the opposition, and so you learned what you needed to do to be able to answer questions and to make sure that you didn't become the story, that you stuck to the science and what you knew rather than what your opinion might be. So again, at this time we built up a really close collaboration with this ASC so that we could transition our technology through to them so it could be fielded into the Collins Class. One of the things that was a little bit different at that time, and when I talk about us being able to save lives, in 2003 Deshano had a flood off the coast of Western Australia. Two things that submariners fear the most are floods and fires, because that can be death to everyone. And the submarine did have a flood because a hose that was on the boundary between the ocean and the inside of the submarine failed, and the submarines were deep. But they got safely to the surface. And so the Chief of Navy phoned the Chief Defence Scientist at the time, who phoned me at home on a Friday night, and then we phoned Perth and got the hoses quarantined, and they were air freighted to my house overnight because the lab wasn't open overnight, so they couldn't be air freighted into there. And I pulled a team together and we sat down to work out why these hoses had failed. And it was really important that we had an answer quickly, because we needed to know, was it a class-wide issue? Should all submarines be tied up, or were they safe to go to sea? And if they were safe to go to sea, what restrictions might there be on their ability to go back to sea? So there was a lot riding on that, because if we got it wrong, we could lead to the death of our own people. And what do you say to the coroner? What do you say to their families? But again, you step through, you provide the evidence, and you talk about all the various hypotheses, and we were the independent umpires, and the Swedish company came to us again to find out what the consequences were, and so did other submarine nations around the world, to find out what the implications were for their own submarine designs. In 2006 I became the Chief of the Maritime Platforms Division, so broader than submarines, so looking at support for surface ships as well, but also Army and some Air Force work. And so the work that Hugh and Bornstein was showing on the work on the vehicles that now sits in Land Division originated from the Maritime Platforms Division, and we were looking at Bushmaster vehicles and the protection against improvised explosives devices. And again, the sorts of things you learn from that sort of program is that we needed to be able to prove the modelling. So how do you prove the modelling? You take a Bushmaster vehicle and you blow it up. A Bushmaster vehicle is about $1 million. So if you go to a Defence Committee and say, please give me a Bushmaster vehicle because I'd like to blow it up and it won't work anymore, you've got to have really sound reasons and to be able to demonstrate the need for doing that. But we were able to do that, and to date there's been no Australian lives lost from people travelling in Bushmaster vehicles while they've been on operations, and that's something that we're, again, really proud of. Other things that I think just sit out a little bit outside the work that's done through the divisions is that HMAS Sydney, which was lost in the Second World War, was discovered off the coast of Western Australia, and there was an inquiry into why it had been lost with no lives saved. There'd been lots of myths that had grown up in between. So again, they came to us, and this was a really good way for us to use all the models that we use for current ships and to understand their survivability, to apply it to an old vessel and then be able to talk about it, because we can't talk about what it is that we're doing today or the reality of the results. You can talk about the underpinning science, and you need to be able to publish again. You need to be able to build your scientific credibility, and to be able to be given the opportunity and have faith placed in you that when you're giving an opinion, why someone should stop and listen to what you say. So we did that, and I think that we built a really good reputation. And then several years ago, based on the knowledge that we had with hydrodynamics, we were asked to re-engage with Japan and start to build a regional engagement again on the basis of science. And again, that was a really good opportunity for us. So I went to Japan. The person sitting across the other side of the table, who was head of the Japanese lab, was the person that I met back in the early 1990s with the Stirling Engine Users Group. So sometimes things come around with serendipity that can really pay off. So with being a Chief of Division and then moving to the Science Strategy and Program Division, it's really shaping the next generation of scientists and shaping the science in the next generation. And so with Next Generation Technologies Fund, we work on shaping the future, and you're the future. I'm the past. I think it's probably time for me to wrap up now, but the messages that I'd like to leave you with is that you can make a difference. I think with the refresh of Australian capability for defence now, you've got this amazing opportunity in the next few years. You'll have unique experiences. I think you can make friends and contacts from around the world, and that's I think really a wonderful sort of life to have. The final thing I leave you with is that it's really important, I think, that all scientists have mentors. Along the way, there were people I've used as sounding boards, people I trust. I think it's really important that sooner rather than later you find people you can trust to help you talk about your career, who have your best interests at heart. So thank you for listening.
You to stay on stage with us for a moment. We do have a few minutes for questions. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Janice Cocking this morning? We'll make the most. I think make the most of this opportunity while we have her here.
What was the scariest thing you've had to do?
I think that the scariest thing actually is signing off. To sign off to say that the submarines are safe to go back to sea. So we needed to be really, really certain that the evidence that we had was, the best possible evidence. Those hoses for that were hand-built hoses. We went down. We analysed to the extent of who built which hose. As it turned out, the hoses that failed were built by one person, and we had to provide the assurance that that all the other hoses were safe, and put in place tests to reject every other hypothesis, because the hose builder said it was impossible for their hoses to have failed. So we tested lots of different things, but we were confident in the end. But that was the scariest thing.
You mentioned in your speech that you had opportunities to benchmark DST against other international organisations. How would you say we hold up to the other big countries?
I think we actually hold up really well. So I've been involved in going and reviewing submarine programs in overseas organisations, but in DST we have independent experts come in on a 4-year rolling basis and review the quality of the science, not the program itself, but the quality of the science, and they provide feedback on that, and they come from national and international, and we have a remediation fund for areas where the health we think needs to be improved, but in general, I would say that we are up with world benchmark, and so it's measured against world benchmarks. That's published internally, so we know how good the underpinning science base is.
Yeah.
So you can probably get access to what the areas are of the different MST's major science and technology capability areas are. On the quality, the chiefs of division all have that information. Yeah, yep.
Any other questions for Janice?
Thank you. What have your experiences been as a woman working both like as a researcher and as a chief over your career?
Because I was a novelty a bit, and that can be good and bad. So people remember you because there's not so, you're different. So if you do something good, they remember that. If you do something bad, they can remember that too. As far as discrimination goes, I think that from my perspective, I've had mentors who are generally men, because that's what's out there, and it's been really positive. And for me, in my career, it's been very positive. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been the odd challenge, but I think that the challenges that men face, they face challenges, they might not be identical, but usually people who harass women will harass men too. Just takes on a slightly different guise, because generally it's about power. I've had the experience of having my work plagiarised. That's not so fun. The people who discovered that were men, and they are the ones who brought it to my attention. So I would say that my experience has been so positive.
We might have time for one more question.
So you learned about, you're working on various projects that didn't have, that weren't very interrelated in terms of the physics. How did you go about learning about the different processes and the different for your project?
So that's one of the good opportunities that you have inside the organisation, is that you actually have time to go and find experts, learn from them, learn on the job, go do courses. So that through life learning has various jargon phrases associated with it, but the ability to learn on the job and take up new skills, I think you need to understand that you get to a certain level of maturity in one field. If you're going to swap fields a bit, you drop down your level of maturity again, and that takes time to build it up. So there'll be these like sawtooth changes in your knowledge, but you bring with it. For me, the underpinning thing that never changed was my training and ability as an analyst. And you hone your ability as an analyst in different ways and apply your analytical skills in different ways. And so it's understanding the systems and the subsystems. You need to take time to do that. Working with the military and understanding, as Todd said, going out with them in the field really helps understand how the systems really operate, as opposed to what you might read in online or in a book.
Thank you again. Okay, that concludes the first session for this morning. Please join us for morning tea out in the lobby, and we'll return here at 11 o'clock.